Hi, and welcome to the Sydney Film Festival, a conversation on Araja Rise Up. Ajaraja Gajiku, Ajiniga Pauline Clegg. I'd like to introduce and acknowledge that we all virtually are standing on the lands of the Gadigal people where the Sydney Film Festival is held. And I'd like to introduce the director and the main talent. I don't know what to call you, Dean, of this gorgeous film, Dean Widders and Larissa Brent. Welcome, both of you.
Thanks, Pauline.
Thanks, Pauline.
It feels like the one thing I was saying, I think I've told you both before, the one thing that's really fitting about this one is it's really unusual in a way for you, Larissa, to be doing a film like this, because we're so used to you doing these like hard-hitting political, and this one was a really beautiful journey of sort of kind of sports meets culture, you know? Do you want to talk about how you got to make this film?
Yeah, and it's true, it was very different for me in a range of ways. As you said, I usually do the, they're taking our kids, the kids have been murdered kind of films that have, really tough storylines. But I think the other thing was really different for me too was that I've often focused on women's stories as well. So that was different. And usually I've been at the beginning of starting the story I want to work towards putting into film. And I was very lucky that I crossed paths with Dean, who had thought this would make a good documentary, so came on board with that. I remember the first meeting I had with him about it, and I thought, it's not what I usually do. But once I got caught up with his enthusiasm and I could see what he saw and could see what was possible with the journey of the story, though, I think with COVID, it ended up very differently. And I guess I always knew in my heart from the start, even though Dean obviously has excelled in sport, that this was also a dance film, which is much more my area. But for me, the celebration of culture has always been a really strong theme in my storytelling, and it felt like that was there front and centre. So I was pretty much hooked after that first meeting with Dean about it.
Dean, you've been such a stalwart of our community in terms of sport, but you've also been a really quiet achiever. And so, a lot of the times we've never seen you on film, like talking and expressing that real depth of your story and showing your family, like you can tell your dad's hesitancy within the filmmaking of it as well. But like, how did it feel for you to go through this journey of showing a very different side to you?
I suppose I had a really good connection with Larissa, even before the film, and she's always been someone that I've admired and looked up to. And I think our relationship has always been really natural. We've always been able to sit and yarn, and I learn a lot from her and stuff like that. So I think that was a journey that I really enjoyed. And I sort of, throughout the filming, throughout all the interviews, I was more focused on the process that we were going through, the discussions that I was having with Larissa, the things I was picking up in all the discussions that I was having with different people. So I was actually growing and learning as a person throughout the filming as well. So when I look back on it, and someone said to me the other day, are you a good actor and stuff? I said, well, it's actually got nothing to do with acting. I'm not acting at all in this. I'm not, I was just being myself, but reflecting a lot on who I was and what were my strengths and what I was passionate about and why I've been so driven. And that's all I concentrate on as I was going through this journey. So for me, I feel like it wasn't about creating a film. It was about a person sitting down with a lot of people that he admires and getting ideas from, drawing inspiration from them, and then talking about my passion for culture and how proud I am of where I'm from and how I wish I knew more and I got that opportunity to learn more, and then how that just strengthened my ideas about how Aboriginal culture can bring people together in this country And I think this film really reinforces that with people. And I hope that everyone that watches, and I know that everyone that watches it will walk away feeling more together, you know, like more unity. And I think that's the best thing for it, is this film will bring people together. And that's what I've always tried to do in my whole life, through my footy and through everything I do.
Well, one of the things that's really beautiful about this film is seeing the strength of our men being put up on stage. And, you know, we have great mentors that we don't often hear them all talking about both their love for football, but also their love for culture and wanting to, you know, create this legacy of this dance. How did that feel for you, Larissa, putting that up?
I love that part of the film, and it was very important to me, not just because of, you know, my relationship with the men in my family, and particularly the responsibility I feel for the younger men in my family. You know, as you know, Pauline, we've worked a lot on the impact of the Northern Territory intervention, and one of the most insidious things about the whole narrative that saw it introduced was the demonising of Aboriginal men, which many felt very keenly. And so to me, what I see on the screen are the type of proud, just amazingly strong, respectful men that are in my family and in my community. You know how many times you look through a film when you're editing, and there's not a single time where I don't feel a sense of pride about being able to show that side of Aboriginal men's leadership in the community. Particularly, you know, I think what we see along the way, we see it through the generations. We've got, you know, Dean's wonderful, warm father, Uncle Bob and Uncle Max, and you got these young players like Cody and Latrell, and I just even think for Dean's cohort, one of the things that for me, it was one of the most moving scenes. It was a very personal one. I would say my favourite scene is when the men are painting up. As soon as I saw that, I sort of I got together with Andrea Lang, the editor, and it was the first scene we cut because we just loved the material so much. But there was another scene that was really important to me, and it's only very briefly in the film, but it's when Dean is with Wesley Enoch and Stephen Page, and they're walking on the Barangaroo site, named after one of our really strong women. And for these three men who I've known for a really long time, especially Wesley and Stephen, are growing up in the same area, I could see that these men who I thought of as peers and brothers, I could see them at the beginning of that transition into their eldership, just at the very beginning of it, as we see them creating space for others and starting to think about, after all this legacy I've got now, whether it's Dean in his football, Wesley and Stephen in the performing arts, what's the next thing and what's the legacy? And I still get a bit teary when I think about it, but it's sort of seeing those transitions of what it means to be an Aboriginal male that you and I see all the time in our family, but we don't often see them captured in film. And just being able to kind of do that and know that I've made a film that my nephews can see and know that every single man in there will be a role model for them was something that's made this film really, really special to me.
I mean, that's one thing, Dean, you've been an amazing mentor in the football and just in the community. You know, I've seen you at those 6 o'clock sessions of the boxing stuff with the young kids, and, you know, like, you know, your support of the women football side. This sort of kind of documenting, I suppose, the history of this dance, and what do you hope it will do in the future for the next generations?
I think Uncle Max said this beautiful line with me where he said, the more I give, and he's speaking about our culture, the more I give it away, the more I get to keep it. And I think for me, that's the big thing that as Indigenous people in this country, I think is our next big thing, is to give our culture to the non-Indigenous people in this country. I think there's a lot for us to gain from that. And it's so true. The more I think about it, it's in anything really, the more we give it away, the more we get to keep, you know. And I love that. And this film's about that. It's about sharing our culture, teaching some non-Indigenous people. I've had so many discussions and so many trips I've been on where a non-Indigenous person will come up to me and go, you know what, it's the first time I've ever learned anything about Aboriginal culture. And I'm thinking, you know, it's crazy to think that you know, it's not taught in our schools. It's not something that's commonly spoken about. And the lack of education, I suppose, that people have around our people, the lens that we're always viewed in the media and in the public, it's sad. And I think this film is one step towards sharing and showcasing our culture in a real positive lens. And I hope that people feel that they can take those next steps after they take this first step about learning a little bit about our culture, feeling proud about it. And I hope, you know, the question was for me early in this film was around, the challenge was to get the Australian rugby league team, the Kangaroos, to perform this dance. And I saw that as my challenge. Like, this is what I want to achieve, and I'm going to be the person to push the agenda, you know. But as I made this film, I felt so good about my culture and so strong about it that I thought, you know what, it's not my challenge, it's other people's challenge. It's non-Indigenous Australia's opportunity for them to embrace in our culture and lead the way and do something significant in this space. And I'd love to see, you know, rugby league take up this dance and perform it on the national stage, but for it to mean something to them. And I think that's the challenge for non-Indigenous Australians, is to come in. This is your welcome in. Now come in and learn about our culture and embrace our culture, because it will make you a better person, better family, but also like better Australia. So hopefully this is just that first little step for some people.
I think that's one thing that's really beautiful, because you sort of you sit there and you go, oh, is this going to be a football show? And then you know, in one way you get the history lesson of a whole lot of the racism and a whole lot of that, but through the dance there's also a lot of healing, like the story of your father almost gets healed, you know, Adam Goodes almost gets healed by this process of you as men standing together. You know, it has this really momentous conversation that you've been a part of, you know, both of you have been a part of, is sports and racism in the last couple of years, but also how do you get out of that conversation and start looking towards the forward movement?
You know, it's interesting that you speak about healing, and it is true. I saw that in Adam Goodes. I saw that in my dad, as he's sitting there in front of me talking about stories that he'd never shared with me before. And I could tell that he was being healed by talking about this and seeing the movement of this film and what it was creating with it. And you know what? Our culture is healing, isn't it? It's a gentle, generous culture. It's a giving culture. And it helps heal people. And we speak forever about, you know, for all our people who've been through trauma or suffering, that they need to get back on country, they need to get back and connected. And for me, this is the first time I'd ever been involved in dancing my culture. Like, I thought, you know, culturally I was strong, but I've never danced, I've never sang, I've never been out painted up before in my life. But that stuff is so powerful and it is healing, and we need to do more of it, you know. And I hope that for our footballers, for the young people that watch the footballers perform on the All-Stars or perform last year when we danced on that big stage, I hope they all just go, you know what, I'm going to get painted up and I'm not going to be ashamed about it. I'm not going to let everyone else worry about it. And I'm going to feel that power too, because I wish I felt that power all through my life as a kid growing up. I would have probably healed and you know, got over things and felt more confident and stronger than ever if I had that with me growing up. And it's a shame, but we're chasing it now and we're trying to push that message.
How about for you, Larissa? How was it trying to like balance that in the film?
I have to say, Dean was a gift to work with in so many ways. He's very generous, so he was always up for things. He was a great performer. He's so genuine and honest. We could do a lot of things with just one take. It was just a delight to work with. But there was another aspect that I really enjoyed in terms of working with Dean, and he's a very optimistic, positive person. So COVID really challenged Dean, and we got to kind of follow the impact of Dean losing what he thought was most close to him, which was his football, to find himself by that. And when that disappeared and he needed this strength, seeing how he was able to then turned to his culture. I mean, this is one of the beautiful things about filmmaking, that every day I'm grateful for you taking me into this world, Pauline. So just want to acknowledge you as one of my great mentors in that space. But, you know, it is this thing of being able to follow something as an observer. And, you know, I got to see Dean as he was trying to reconfigure his life in a COVID world where football commentating, coaching was all gone to him, how much that embrace of his culture changed him, and seeing his leadership on that stage with men like, you know, Stan Grant and Michael O'Loughlin and Adam Goods, you know, the Bangara dancers and Shane Phillips, you know, was where a place that he never thought that he would be. And I just love that transition of Dean at the beginning, really, in a way, begging people to take the dance on, and then being so unapologetic about how he's giving it to the world was a wonderful transition. So that cultural focus, I think, for us is the assertion of sovereignty and the assertion of our culture, following Dean's journey of that. And in a way, that is the answer to racism. That is the answer to the racism that stopped Dean's dad's generation from being able to play at an elite level, from the way in which the nasty petty racisms that were riddled their lives, that you know, Jake shares with us about what it was like. You know, it reminds me of the Nikki Winmar moment. When you are being racially abused, you lift your shirt and point to your skin and proudly say, I'm Black. That idea of you meet racism with pride, I thought was a really important way of us adding to that conversation, where we do deconstruct race, we do challenge it, we talk about systemic racism in other forums, but in this beautiful sacred space of storytelling, you know, that focus on self-determination, sovereignty and pride just seemed like one of the best ways to counter racism.
I think that's one thing that's really lovely about this, because they're all the themes of this documentary, but they're not signposting. They're just a journey that you as men are going on. You know, I do have to say your mother is just as much of a part of the key to the story, even though I say there's very much men. She makes the impact that is very softly matter of fact. And you sit there and you go, you know, like that essence of family and community. And you know, even the community that becomes a new community through this work, that and the piece that you finally do is something that is evolutionary and really a sense of sort of kind of, you know, our culture isn't stagnant, it is evolving. It is, you know, we are in urban settings away from our country, and so finding those momentums of things that help us to ground is really important. And I think, you know, Dean, it's been a really beautiful journey to finally see that captured on screen as well.
Yeah, and, you know, this is one of the big things I love about working with Larissa. So I would have something challenge me and I'd be thinking about how can I do this? Or I'd think of what is the next direction in this film, or where are we going to go? And I'd go to Larissa and I'd give the question and she'd already have the answer, and she'd go, yep, I've already. And it was just these really strange, and it happened a fair few times where I'd go to her with maybe an idea or a challenge that's coming up for me in my personal life or part of the film. And she'd go, I've already considered that. No, this is the answer and this is what we're going to do. And this is how it's going. So she had this sort of roadmap for us, you know, on how everything would sort of, or where it would go. So, but really beautifully led. And you see that through the story, that it's a great little journey. And yeah, for me, I'd like to say that I was just a passenger on a beautiful ride that Larissa set for me. And it was just, when I look back on it, it's like, you know, my football career was a highlight, my kids being born and all that sort of stuff. But the work that I got to do with Larissa now, looking back, and I've got so many photos and stuff I look back on, and I just go, oh, you know, I've forgotten some of the fantastic stuff that we did. I have to look through the photos because it was such a good journey. It was such a good experience. And sometimes you don't get that when you're actually doing it, but down the track when you reflect on it, it was so nice.
And where do you hope, how do you hope audience perceive the film in a way, Larissa, and for you?
For me, a big part of it was to be so impressed by the strength and resilience and the power of Aboriginal men, and to see a side of our male warriors that they don't see in mainstream media. You know, the father-son scenes in the film, both between Dean and Jake, and then you know, in the scenes where the men are performing together, I think is, you know, some of the most lyrical I've ever shot. I just love them. So for me, that's a big part. It's dispelling that. And I think it goes to what Dean was saying too. It's about people starting to understand how deep and healing our culture is. I think one of the lovely cultural journeys on the way too was seeing how Dean and the cohort that have really developed the dance, although as Dean so passionately and evocatively says, it's you stand there on a field and the haka is performed at you and you want to be able to answer it with something. And the more that Dean and everyone else dug into what that dance should be, they realised how unlike the Maori we are in culture. You know, of course we are. Dean and I used to say it's the old man talking to the young boy. We're the oldest living culture, and the Maori are teenagers by comparison, the youngest culture in the Pacific. So, you know, the teenager is energetic and wanting to impress, and we're kind of silent and waiting to be impressed. And there's kind of a lovely way of understanding the way that our cultures interact, which they do on so many wonderful levels. And for me, I think starting for our own people to see what's beautiful in the stillness of our culture. And as you know, Pauline, particularly for young people, when they see the Polynesian cultures in the Pacific, which are, you know, very vibrant, the sense is almost to want to emulate them without actually digging into why our cultures are here in Australia on the mainland are cultures that hunt quietly. And Dean and I had a lot of conversations about that as we were really starting to understand the distinctiveness. So it was a lovely thing to not be comparing our culture to Western culture and thinking about how is it different. That conversation that we've had since birth, but, you know, it was a really different one to think about what do we respect and honour about Maori culture, but how different is it to how we understand our own, and how do we celebrate both? I thought was a really interesting cultural space that Dean and I were really interested in exploring. I do love the scenes where Dean tries the haka. I think they were just so great. You know, he's up for everything, and it was about seeing what was happening there and looking at how the haka has become this huge cultural statement for all New Zealanders, and thinking, well, that's kind of where we want to go, but we need to make our own path. So, so Dean sort of started the journey now. It'll be interesting to see where he goes next. But for me, they were some of the things that I hoped an audience would take away.
So sorry, that was on me. I did turn my phone off, but I forgot to turn it off on my computer, so I apologise for that last interruption. I think just to sort of say, Dean, one of the things, you know, the stance and the silence is the point that is so powerful in this film. When you do, you know, when you're teaching those young ones how to do it, it's just like, it's that moment of just going, I can see the ancestors standing behind you. I can see, you know, I can see all those football players from before being a part of that legacy wall of that stance. And it's just a moment where you can see the moment of the light bulb for the kids as well. It's just really beautiful. And it, you know, how do you hope to integrate it out? Are you going to turn this into a TikTok fanatic thing? How are you going to push it so that this becomes something? Or is the film made and you're going to let it do part of that work?
Yeah, well, I think like Larissa said it beautifully there about the father-son thing. You know, and I inherited some of my dad's challenges, I suppose you could say, and through building my rugby league career, I was able to overcome some of those challenges and heal for him. And I think I passed that on to my own son around my strength that I've drawn from my culture and my journey, and now it's up for him to take that somewhere. And I think you saw that through a lot of the parts of the film. I know I spoke to George Rose and Cody Walker, and George said he was so proud that his son was there, you know, to see, and Cody had his boys there, and I think that's a big part of it. Stan Grant had his dad speaking over the microphone and the speakers while he was about to perform, and he got quite emotional about it. And I think, as men, we've never come together before on those sort of things. I didn't have those experiences as a young person growing up, and I think for me it's about that passing on. You know, we hope that we have inspiration and we've guided these young guys, but working alongside kids in everything that I do, and the next generation and stuff like that, I hope that we play that part in building them up to be able to step forward and make some big leaps forward for our people. So I definitely see that as part of my legacy, is to give it to someone else, and for someone else to go and do great things. And I think with the young footballers we have and the way they're inspiring the younger people coming through and stuff like that, there's some great opportunities for our people ahead. And I feel that this is just part of that ripple effect. This is just a small part of it, and I think we did it well.
I think that's one thing with the film. You know, one of the things that our culture is, the way we teach is by doing. And so documenting the doing and the journey to it allows for the next generation to see all of the cultural layers that they need to understand before they get on the field and dance that dance, you know, which is really beautiful.
Excellent.
So I want to thank you both for such a beautiful time talking with me today. And, you know, we want you to, are you going to cinemas at some point as well after Sydney Film Festival?
I think the plan is there's a couple of other film festivals, and then the film plays on NITV in January. But I am hoping that we do a big community screening at Armidale. I think the Armidale community is pretty keen on that every time I talk to anyone from up there. So that would be very special, and it would still be nice. I think Dean and I are hoping that we'll get a NRL event to bring everyone together, because it just hasn't been possible during COVID. So hopefully we'll have a few special screenings between now and the NITV screening.
Well, thank you so much for your journey, and thank you, Dean, for putting it on screen, and for Larissa to follow the journey as well. It's been something that, has been really inspiring to watch you go that next level, Dean. And you know, we always knew you were a deadly fella. It's just like now we have the film to show that, you know, there's a strength in the quietness, and there's a strength in the way in which your legacy from your mum and dad has been brought down, and can't wait to see what you do next. And Larissa, as always, you know, you're formidable, and it's nice to see the woman's touch on a men's story.
Oh, thanks, Pauline. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Lovely, Pauline. Thanks for that.